Okay, things are a little different, Mr. Cardenas. First of all, good morning. I want to welcome everybody here. I'm joined by Council Member Perry and Cardenas. We hope to have a joint hearing today with HCD and planning, but I don't know if that's going to occur. But HCD does have a quorum at this point in time. So what I want to do is go through items 2 through 12, which are HCD items, Mr. City Attorney, and we'll hopefully we will get a representative from the Plum Committee. Okay, so with that said, and with this new setup here, I don't know where I have to look to my left. Maybe it's a good thing to look to my left. Okay.
I like it over here.
No, you're too far away.
No, I have my independence.
God. I'm gonna get people that are here and make them come sit just to fill this thing out. Miss Barclay, let's start this out with items 2 and 3.
Item two is a report from the Community Redevelopment Agency and the Chief Legislative Analyst relative to the issuance of tax-exempt multifamily housing revenue bonds for the Alexandra Housing Apartments Permanent Supportive Housing Project. And item 3 are reports from the CRA and the CLA and a resolution relative to the issuance of tax-exempt multifamily housing bonds for the Hollywood Bungalow Court Apartments.
All right, then we'll adopt the CLA report on those items. That brings us to item 4.
Item 4 is a report from the CRA and the City Administrative Officer relative to increasing the existing permanent loan with Los Angeles Housing Partnership for the Bronson Courts Affordable Housing Project. The CAO has provided the reporting in committee.
Okay, so then on item 4, we'll adopt the CAO report. It's my understanding it's in. It's yeah. I've been informed that Mr. Cardenas has some questions on item 5, so why don't we just hold that and move to item 6?
Item 6 is a report from the CRA and the CLA relative to awarding contracts to 5 firms for urban forestry services in various CRA redevelopment project areas. A technical amendment to this item has been provided to the clerk.
Okay, so then we'll adopt the CLA report with the technical amendments. That bring us to item 7.
Item 7 is reports from the CRA and the CLA relative to amending the redevelopment plans for 7 redevelopment project areas, including the proposed merger of these areas, extension of eminent domain time limits, and increase in the bonding capacity.
Okay, then on item 7, we'll adopt the CLA report, bringing us to item 8.
Item 8 is a report from the CRA and the CLA relative to service repayment loan agreement with the Esperanza Community Housing Corporation.
Okay, item 8 will adopt the CLA report. Item 9.
Item 9 is a report from the CRA and the CAO relative to converting prior loan balances of approximately $2.136 million to a new permanent loan agreement with Renato Apartments.
Okay, then we'll adopt the CAO report on that. That'll bring us to what item, Mr. City Clerk?
Item number 10, sir.
All right, you're on it. Okay, Ms. Barclay, item 10.
Item 10 is a report from the Los Angeles Housing Department and the CAO relative to and Tax Equity and Fiscal Responsibility Act resolution and minutes relative to the Leeward, Plaza, and Taylor Terrace apartment projects.
Okay, on item 10, we'll adopt the CAO report. Item 11.
Item 11 is a report from LAHD and the CAO relative to executing a contract with Amera National Community Services to support LAHD's amortizing loan portfolio.
Item 11, then we'll adopt the CAO report. Okay, now I have a card on item 12. If you could read item 12, and then I'm going to have Tara come up and speak on the item. Item 12.
Item 12 is a motion, Weezar Labange, relative to amending the Los Angeles Municipal Code to reflect current domestic partnership law. A technical amendment on this item has also been provided to the clerk.
Okay. 20.
Good morning, council members. My name is Tara Bannister. I'm Executive Director of the California Apartment Association. I live and work here in Los Angeles. We represent landlords, managers, developers, as well as carpenters, drywallers, all those that have to do with apartments. We actually looked at an ordinance like this, and a motion like this, about 4 years
You
ago,
represent plumbers too?
including plumbers,
Joe?
including, well,
No, he ain't union, dude. He
he's
ain't
not licensed, so no. Have to be licensed.
I'm sorry, go on, I couldn't help it.
In state law and local law, current spouses do not automatically get added onto leases once two people get married. And of course, then neither are domestic partners or married people if they happen to be man, woman, it doesn't matter. And that is specifically because tenants believe that a landlord is helping to protect them from fellow tenants. They don't want somebody to move in that's maybe a pedophile and there's kids, or that there is a burglar moving in when obviously they believe their possessions to be protected. And because of that, in fact, there is state law and precedence that we are held liable for dangerous propensities. So in this case, that would be specifically why I'd be against this motion.
Okay. Now, it's my understanding, a little bird just told me, that the technical amendment may address your concerns. Meg, can you read the technical amendment?
Yes, sir.
I could be wrong, or the little bird could be wrong.
Yes, sir. We're recommending that the motion be amended to add an instruction to the Los Angeles Housing Department to report to council in 60 days with an assessment of the difficulties encountered by tenants under current city law with moving spouses or domestic partners into their existing apartments, including any complaints received by the LAHD. We would recommend that report come forward prior to an ordinance being drafted.
Wonderful.
Okay, all right. Then on item 12, we'll adopt the motion with the technical amendments. That brings us back to item 5.
Item 5 is a report from the CRA and the CAO relative to restructuring 9 loans and permitting the borrower to backfill operating and replacement reserve accounts.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm just going to turn it over to Mr. Cardenas. I don't know if you want them to make a presentation or go right
Sure,
into your-
if they have anything they'd like to open on, yeah.
Yes, my name is Stanley Lefkowitz, and I'm with CRA. What we were attempting to do with SRO was basically clean up the portfolio. These loans were made over an extended period of time, and at least
A
one...
little closer to the microphone, please.
Oh, sorry. These loans were made over an extended period of time for various properties, and there was actually one group that was just thrown together. This was advances made after the projects had been mostly completed and they needed additional funds. It was thrown into a contingency pool, which was sitting out there, almost $1 million, with no collateral and no interest, which is obviously not in the interest of the agency. So we decided to do that, as well as resolve a problem that SRO had, which was that these properties, in terms of reserves, were underfunded. They just didn't have enough money. As it is, actually, one of these buildings is going to be torn down soon. So we wanted to come up with a mechanism to allow them to backfill their reserves. And by doing so, still maintain the integrity of the portfolio. So what we did was we came up with this formula where instead of making residual receipt payments, which are essentially interest due on the loans, we allow them to defer that interest and make the deposits into the reserve accounts, which they did. All of the deposits have been made. This was what it was. It was a cleanup. And then it took us quite a while to get the agreements in place because we were taking the old agreements and actually canceling them out and creating new ones. And because so much has changed in the 20 years or so that these were originally drafted, we had to come up with a new formula. And we'd never done this before. This was entirely new, this idea of backfilling reserves. And this is what this was all about. And we worked with SRO well over a year putting this together. I believe somebody from SRO is here today. And
I hope so. Is anybody here from SRO? Please come forward. Continue.
yeah. And this is essentially what it is. We have not changed anything. The maturities on these loans are the same, the principal balances are the same, the interest due is the same, the covenants are the same. All we did was housekeep. We did make one other change.
What's left in housekeeping after all of that stays the same?
Well, because we consolidated these loans, where we had 16, 18 loans before, now we have only 9.
Yeah, but how do you consolidate a bunch of loans? How many were there? 18, 15 loans?
But, okay, you had 3 loans or 4 loans for the Leo Hotel, now we have 1. All we're doing is dividing the balances into a single
Hold on,
promissory
Stanley,
note.
hold on.
Excuse me.
So with all due respect, the maturities on those 3 loans that were now consolidated together into one loan, the maturities were all the same date?
Yep. They were all
And the rates
2000
were the same rates?
They were all 3%. The ones that were not were the pool loans, and those were 0%, and they had no maturity date. So we actually, in effect, improved our position.
0% loans with no maturity date. That's not a loan.
Well, I didn't make them. That's the way they did
No,
them.
I'm not arguing with you, but what I'm saying is if you look in the dictionary for what a loan is, there's certain elements that make it a loan.
There was a promissory note. Okay.
Promise to do what?
They promised to pay it back.
But there's
Right, and there was
No
no
maturity
security. No,
date.
I agree with you. We had to do something about it. We hadn't done it. So we addressed the problem.
who hadn't done it? The payee hadn't done it, or who hadn't
CRA
done
hadn't
what?
done anything about it.
What's that?
CRA hadn't done anything about it. We carried it for years that way. We
Are
needed
there
to
other?
address it.
Are there other?
Now, this is a very unique situation.
I know, but I need you to help me out so I can understand that this is either the only unique situation like this, or there's a bunch of other ones that CRA needs to clean up. Are there other agencies or organizations that have a similar package of activity with CRA that need to be cleaned up as well?
Not like this, no.
Wouldn't you say not like this, not with this many
We have-
elements, not with this many loans, not with this volume amount of dollars?
No,
What?
SRO is our largest single borrower.
Okay, all right.
So we have other borrowers that are interested in using the same formula, that is deferring interest in placing more money in reserves. But again, that's to the benefit of the agency, because we're protecting the value of the property, which ultimately is how we're going to get paid
Okay.
if they get sold or get restructured or something else.
Now, in all of these notes, they all have a due and payable if they transfer ownership.
Yes, they all have a due on sale clause.
Even if the new organization is still rendering the same service, which I'm assuming there's a service requirement to these tenants, right?
Right. All of these loans are covenanted to provide housing for low-income
Exactly.
residences.
So they can transfer these loans to the new entity if they
With our
abide by
approval.
those covenants?
With our approval.
Okay. And what likely happens in that scenario? CRA, if the new organization is good and in good standing and looks like they're going to be a good actor, we tend to go ahead and allow them to transfer them?
As long as they maintain the housing as originally
Yeah,
covenanted.
that's my point.
Yeah, we would do that. In effect, we're going to.
Normally
do
you
that
do
one
that. Normally you do that. You don't
Yeah.
have to.
No, we don't have to.
At
We're
our
not
discretion.
obligated to.
But normally you do.
Yes.
Okay. Now, were some of these loans delinquent when this restructuring
Technically,
activity
yes,
started?
because the payments were due. What we agreed to do, again, was the payments were due on these loans for residual receipts. And they had been due, some of them going back, a couple of years. But we had been negotiating on this for a couple of years. So you could say they were in default. This does cure all the defaults.
Yeah, but it cures all the defaults by making it convenient for this housing corporation to start anew, right?
No, it simply allows them to take these funds and add them into reserves for these buildings. And these are older buildings with significant problems.
Yeah, but with all due respect, Stanley, right?
Yes.
When somebody enters into agreement with CRA or housing or ABC Bank or what have you, they're supposed to understand what they're getting into. We're not supposed to feel sorry for them, or we're not supposed to say, yeah, but they're old units, right? I mean, that was the whole contemplation when CRA chose to invest in these units with the covenants that was agreed to by this corporation, right?
Right.
That they understood what they were getting into: old units, new units, a lot of units, a few units, and provide single-room occupancy housing, right?
Right.
So what's so special or different or unique or mandatory upon us to give this corporation this kind of restructuring? Because from my vantage point, it's favorable to them. Is it bad? I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying it's favorable to them. They fell out of compliance, or they fell out of favor with us by not completing their end of the bargain, which is to keep the payments up, right?
Right.
And then, so CRA looked at it and said, my gosh, this is the Alice Hotel, the Florence Hotel, the Golden West Hotel, the Herald Hotel, the Haskell Hotel, La Jolla Hotel, Leo Hotel, Panama Hotel, Regal Hotel, and the contingency. Well, that's a contingency pool. That's not a hotel.
It's not a hotel. That's our 4 loans that we had to.
Okay, but we looked at all these things and said, okay, we need to help restructure this. We need to keep things going. We want SRO housing to continue, right?
Right.
With this particular corporation, right?
This was a mutual benefit situation. I mean, we don't need the $436,000 to keep operating CRA, but they need that money to keep these buildings.
Remember
operating.
that, members, when it's budget time? Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to get in
I know
trouble
where I
for
can
this
put
one.
it. I know where I can put it.
Okay.
No, I think I understand what you mean.
Right. It was mutually benefit for both of us to do it this way, because the alternative, it was not particularly good either.
What was the alternative?
Well, if we were gone all the way with it, we could have theoretically foreclosed on these properties, and that's not what we wanted.
Yeah, but that's one of the problems that I have with government. Whenever a partner or an entity fails to do their part, government doesn't follow through with the stick. We say, whoa, wait a minute. There's public interest involved here, and I know that you made a commitment, but we're not going to hold you to it. We gotta reorganize this. We gotta restructure this. We gotta go soft on you. We gotta realize that we don't want your responsibility, right? Because the alternative is, if we foreclose, that means CRA for a period of time is going to be in control of these units, right?
Yeah, but that's not really. But that wasn't going to work here.
Why? But
Well-
it's part of the default process, right?
Yes.
I'm trying to be quick, Mr. Chairman, but this is taking
No,
a
no,
while.
no. Go ahead. No. I'm saying, under these particular circumstances, the integrity of the units was more important than us taking.
Now, you're talking about the integrity of the service rendered in those buildings, or you're talking about the integrity of the physical units?
Both, because both of those were important. Okay, SRO does a good job at what they do.
They do a good job of what they do, but they're not good at making their payments to CRA.
All right. Well,
Come on, let's be honest.
okay, that's true.
Don't say okay, please. Yes or no. Are they good at making their payments to CRA?
On their amortized loans, they make their payments as agreed. On these loans, they have not.
Why? Well, did you ask them why they're not making good on these like they do on their others?
Yes,
What did they say?
they said they needed these funds for deposits into the reserves, because these buildings do require a lot of maintenance. They're very old. They do have things that break down. They do provide a high level of services. This was beneficial to both of us because we need to maintain this stock of housing. And if we allow it to deteriorate, it creates, we have to find something else to replace it. And it's a lot cheaper to do this than to go out and start all over again.
So basically, the tenants are the hostages.
Well, I don't know.
No, let me finish. That's my word. That's my analogy. So what happens is, we want these tenants to be provided certain services in this specialized housing, right?
Correct.
And then what happens is, if for some reason things aren't going well, or things are getting a little shaky, or things are getting a little light in the wallet for the providers of those services, What happens is we, CRA or the city, says, well, we're not going to come down on you and force you to keep all of your agreements and responsibilities, because you're telling us that if we give you the payments like we're supposed to, then the service of our tenants actually is going to go down. Isn't that what you just described? And we don't want the latter to happen?
That's correct. We want to maintain these facilities.
We want these facilities to be maintained.
Correct.
And CRA doesn't want to be in the business of maintaining them directly, which you never said you wanted to or
No.
you're not supposed to. That's why you have third parties and you have these covenants and you have these notes with these third parties. In this case, SRO Housing Corp.
That's correct.
So we allow ourselves, your department allows itself to insert the non-tangible values in how and when and who you hold accountable when it comes to agreements.
That's not entirely true. We take a look at every situation individually. We make
But why do you look at every situation individually? Why don't you just look at the black and white language and just deal with it as it comes? They're 30 days late, you notify them. They're 60 days late, you notify them. They're 90 days late, then you start to foreclose. Why don't you do that? You just described to me and you just explained to me that this particular corporation that's handling this many units of SRO housing is so important that we keep the integrity and the services to the tenants that you forego the process of holding them to the letter, and the result is the renegotiation that's before us on this item, right?
Right.
So you do, in fact, use the situation to look beyond the letter of the contracts and agreements, and then decide how you're going to deal with each particular each particular entities that owes the CRA money and that has responsibilities and contracts with you, correct?
That's correct. But that's standard lending. I mean, every lender operates that way. You have to look at each individual situation. You have to make a judgment. Is it worth it to you to pursue this all the way to foreclosure?
Okay. My next question is this. Once you do this restructuring and SRO Housing Corporation wants to take on another very important building with very important tenants, and they're probably the best ones to do it, and they say, well, we'll take that on as well. Are they going to have to wait a year, 2 years, 5 years before we enter into any more contracts with them? Because remember, the hostages, they're out to save some hostages. We have a 350 unit facility in downtown Los Angeles that's owned by a slumlord, and it really should be SRO housing. It really should have the proper kind of management, et cetera. And those are our constituents. Are we going to contract with them again?
I believe we would.
Mr. Cardenas, Ms. Perry wanted to ask a question.
Oh, I just wanted to...
and then I'll come back to you,
Thank you.
let you close.
Yeah, I won't be too long, and I appreciate your questions. SRO Housing is one of the most prolific developers in Central City East for permanent supportive housing in the city, and without them, I think we'd have a lot more people out on the street. But what I would like to ask, and I've forgotten what department you're from.
Asset management.
Okay. We just got this report this morning on item 5 while we were sitting up here, and I've only had a chance to give it a cursory look. But what I would like to know in terms of policy, SRO is high production in terms of units. Say, for example, maybe Mr. Cardenas may have a project, or Mr. Garcetti may have a project in their district. Is your policy to look at other nonprofit housing developers across the board if they are similarly situated in the same way, or do you make distinctions?
We look at every case individually and make what we feel is what's in the best interests of CRA decision. Well, that's
Well,
most important.
Well, restructuring is a form of a workout in a way.
Right.
And a workout, as you say, is beneficial to both the developer and to the agency, because even if you have to, restructure the terms or write down a loan, at least you're recovering something rather than nothing.
Yes. Well, we're not writing down anything. We're not really
I'm just saying
changing
that
it.
as an example. You're restructuring the
Right.
terms and you're rolling them all together
Right.
into one, for lack of a better word, a jumbo loan as
Right.
opposed to individually individual transactions. So, for example, is this a policy? What makes you decide to apply that here with respect to SRO housing, and may cause you not to apply it elsewhere in another situation? Is it the magnitude of the production of units that SRO has done? Is it the geographic location? What's the difference between this situation and, say, another situation in another council district? Like Mr. Cardenas, for example.
Okay. We've got to look at them. I hate to say that we use, one single value judgment for each borrower. We have to take a look at them, make a determination what is, one, best for the tenants in the property, because that's who we're,
Well, I don't know Mr. Cardenas' district very well, and he knows it better than anybody. But say, for example, he's got a situation where there may be a nonprofit housing developer that may be better suited for a restructuring in order to continue operations and to continue production of units. Especially we're in the situation where we constantly have to fight with the county to get the programmatic and social service funds to match with our housing development, so that we can create projects that are sustainable instead of just throwing up a building and then it doesn't have any services in it, and then people are kind of still out there floating around without any help. Give me an idea on that.
Well, actually, this model we're going to use for another developer who actually approaches about the same situation, which is LA Family Housing, which is based in North Hollywood.
Uh-huh.
But they have sites scattered throughout the city. And again, we looked at the same situation. What do we need, to help them out and for them to help us out? All right? And so this model, and this was approved last year, the LA Family Housing restructuring. And I think it covered 5 or 6 properties, maybe 7. So this is not the first time we've
So
approached.
what do those two situations have in common that made you reach the same conclusion that both would be good candidates for restructuring?
Older properties, high level of social services, organizations that were willing to work with us and had the capacity to fund the reserves. We wouldn't do this if they couldn't fund the reserves. And we're not changing anything. They still owe us the same amount of money. They still have the same maturity date. We still have the same collateral. In this case, we actually improved our collateral position. So that's, those are the parameters we're trying to work with. If we have somebody who's blatant in terms of not wanting to pay us, not wanting to fund reserves, not wanting to hold the covenants, we will foreclose. And we're not afraid to foreclose. We have to look at each individual situation, look who the borrower is, look what the services they're providing, look if they're willing to work with us. SRO was willing to work with us. It took a while, but they were willing to work with us. We came up with this. And they did what we asked them to do, which was make sure they got those reserves funded. We weren't going to let them do it unless that cash went in the bank, and we have evidence that every one of those deposits were made. And that was critical.
Mr. Cardenas.
Okay. Thank you. Funny you should mention LA Family Housing as a result of Ms. Perry's questions, because they want to do a brand-new project in my district.
Yeah, they're a good operator.
Yeah, but you said you're going to have to relook at all of your interactions with them and maybe doing something similar to what
Actually,
you did
we
here.
took that to council last year, and it was approved. The same kind of restructuring as this. We just haven't got it yet because, again, we were working on the agreements. It took a while to go through the city attorney and get these agreements nailed down.
Mm-hmm.
But we're going to do the same thing.
Did LA Family Housing, in the process of all this coming to fruition and the vote of the council, did they ever miss any payments on anything?
Well, no,
Did they
they,
get behind on anything?
yeah, they were behind on the residual receipt payments, and they're going to do the same thing. They're going to add those to their reserves, and we're going to maintain the same exact structure with their loans as well.
Behind on residual receipt payments, what's a residual receipt payment in layperson's terms?
Okay, what it is the borrowers are required to submit their financial statements each year. The way the notes are originally structured, we require that they make payments only for the amount of, for a better term, excess cash that they have after all of their expenses have been accounted for, and we subtract out non-cash expenses, i.e. depreciation and amortization.
Standard formulas.
Standard format, okay? And it's usually a percentage. Well, it could be as high as 100%, it could be 50%, it could be 25%. It's whatever is negotiated when the loan is first made.
Uh-huh.
All right? So we do this every year for each one of the individual housing projects. What makes somebody like SRO or LA Family Housing a little bit more confusing is that they will do an overall financial statement for the whole organization and then individual profit and loss for each housing unit, each housing project. And sometimes expenses don't get washed out properly. I think they're all guilty of that. So it could be that a project that looks like it's making money really isn't, and the one that isn't making money really is. But, we don't really have anything else to work with. So, yeah, it'll come out that they owe us a payment based on the analysis of each individual's year's financial statement based upon the formula that was in the promissory note. So in the case of SRO, it came out to $436,000 over a period of years. This was not a single year.
Now, those residual receipt payments that you just described.
Would be applied to the interest due on the loans.
Okay, but normally, once that happens, there's a payment to CRA.
Correct.
In this case, from SRO Housing Corp., right?
Right.
But they got behind on those kind of payments?
Correct.
Now, what you're doing now, instead of collecting those payments from the past, previous years, that they were behind, you're saying, don't give it to us, CRA, put it in your reserves?
Right. In the promissory note, in the calculation of residual receipts, there is an allowance for reserves. If the borrower doesn't fund that allowance, which was the case here, all right, the option is still there to fund those reserves. So in effect, we're just as we said, backfilling those reserves. We're allowing them to make the deposits that they would have been allowed to make if they would have had the cash. The point is, at that particular time in 2005 or 2006, they didn't have the cash.
So you put it on a ledger that X amount of dollars should
Yes.
be in reserve, or X amount of dollars are verified in reserve?
X amount should be in reserves. They're allowed.
But they don't necessarily
They don't have to.
have them.
They can. That was the other thing. We standardized the reserve requirements. They're allowed $500 a unit per year to put in reserves. So if they have 60 units, they're allowed $30,000 to put in reserves. That is a combination of operating reserves and replacement reserves.
Okay. Now, SRO Housing, your name and your title?
Joseph Corcoran, Director of Planning and Housing Development.
And you're located where?
354 South Spring Street.
That's the headquarters of SRO Housing
Yes.
Corp.?
Yes.
So you're a LA-based not-for-profit?
Yes.
Okay. And do you have projects outside of the city of LA?
No.
Oh, so you concentrate.
Everything we do is in Central City East right now.
And how long have you been doing things in the
25 years.
25 years? What is it about SRO Housing that very few for-profit or not-for-profit entities want to engage in this country? I figure you would know why, because you're probably dealing with those headaches every day. Because I'm assuming that's headaches that people don't want to.
Well, we're mission-driven. I mean, we care about our community, and we were set up 25 years ago with the mission in mind. to redevelop Central City East and preserve affordable housing, and the SRO housing in particular. Now, along the way, the need for supportive services was evident, and so we set up a full array of service department to handle that. Many of these projects do not have funding for those services. We have to get other money and other grants to supplement from the revenue that we get on these properties, supplement that income to pay for all the services. And so we've done a great job for 25 years, and I'm not sure, I'm not the CFO of SRO Housing. 5 years ago, we kind of reorganized. We got a new executive director. We got a new CFO. And this issue came up as a long-standing issue, and so we're here dealing with it.
Okay, you mentioned that supportive services.
Yeah.
Can you give me some examples of what supportive services that are demanded on an SRO project that maybe a regular other project doesn't have?
We might have a couple case managers in one of our buildings. It's just a general low-income population, but these people need money management services. They might have substance abuse problems. They may have mental illness. So we have case managers and tenant services coordinators that can help these people access the services in the community that they need on an ongoing basis.
All right. Okay, we're running out of time, but okay, thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cardenas.
Thanks, SRO.
And without objection, item 5 will adopt the CAO report. We're joined by Council President Garcetti. We will, thank you.
Thank you.
Move to item 1. The way that, Mr. City Attorney, you can help me out here. This item was scheduled to be the joint committee item. And at this juncture, the only members that are here are members of the HCED committee. So once we take whatever action we take, then my guess is this would then go to Plum.
Yes, since we have no members of Plum, this would be simply an action of the HCD committee, and they would have to take action on their own or waive it.
I got it. But now, let me ask you this, Mr. City Attorney. We do have the president of the city council here with us,
Any deputized members?
right? I mean, he is to my right, and isn't it his ability without members voting on it to appoint? So couldn't you, what I recommend, Mr.
Except for
President, you appoint Mr. Cardenas and yourself. You guys represent planning, and no. So at this point, we'll just act as HCD, and then Plum will have the right to waive it or what have you.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, I was saying just temporary.
Back of a napkin, man. Just write it down, submit it.
Temporary. Ed is a good guy. Okay. Ms. Barclay, let's read item 1.
Item 1 are reports from the Los Angeles Housing Department relative to good faith eviction provisions of the rent stabilization ordinance.
Okay. Now, in the interest of time, I'm going to reduce public comment from 2 minutes to 90 seconds. So our clock won't reflect that. So when you get close to your 90 seconds, then I will, as politely as I can, cut you off. Okay, let's start off with, I think it's Michael Sheriff. Please come forward. And then Barbara, Barbara Schultz, you're behind it. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Mike Scharf, 260 South Sycamore Avenue. I'm a teacher in LA. When this amount was increased, I was there that day, and I thank you all. That was a wonderful thing. I understand the difference in why the person is being evicted, but the economic impact on the person being evicted is identical. So I don't think there should be a reduction in the amount. And the people being hit the hardest in this reduction are senior citizens. I think it's approximately 15,000 to 10,000. There are 8 senior citizens in my building, and I know 2 or 3 who are panicked. A lot of their income is in investment accounts, and we know what's happening in the stock market. 20% of their income is gone. I'll tell you, they're depressed, terrified. So I urge you, now also I'm concerned, it takes 3 months to establish if one of these evictions is in bad faith. Where is the person in those 3 months? Living in their car? So this could be easily abused by the owners of these buildings, and it has been abused. That's a strong concern. And it's also the thin edge of the wedge. A 4-unit building, 8-unit building, what comes next? So I urge you to not approve this lowering.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming.
Good morning, Council. Barbara Schultz from Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles. I support several of the provisions to prevent fraudulent evictions. However, I strongly disagree with the proposed decreases in tenant relocation money. The reason qualified tenants historically have gotten more relocation money is that they are the neediest and the most likely to be on fixed or low income, the elderly, the disabled, and those with dependents. I don't understand why this proposal seeks to disparately impact the neediest Angelenos, almost $7,000 from 17 to 10. Particularly when the purpose is to subsidize a minority of higher income residents who can afford to buy, for instance, a fourplex. When we asked LAHD who could afford a fourplex, they said it would have to be someone making at least $180,000 a year. So this proposal seeks to take almost $8,000 away from low-income, disabled, and elderly tenants, an amount which is very meaningful to someone on a fixed income, and give it to someone who makes upwards of $200,000, and to whom $8,000 is a nice bathroom remodel. We cannot subsidize homeownership programs on the backs of the neediest tenants. I urge you to reject these inhumane cuts. Thank you.
Thank you. Larry Gross and Tara Bannister.
No, I'm on the left.
No, you're not.
Good morning.
Good morning. Larry Gross, Coalition for Economic Survival. While we support the RSO protection amendments, we fully oppose any cuts in relocation benefits. Qualified tenants, seniors, disabled, families, and low-income tenants are the ones who are being punished here. These tenants lose $4,400 and $6,700, an amount that's far greater than the other tenants. These are the most vulnerable and needy tenants, and they're being hit the hardest. If you do decide to cut, then make it proportionate, consistent, fairer. That way, all qualified tenants would get $15,000 amount, not the $10,000 amount. Also, place a 3 to 5 year ownership requirement for the reduced relo to ensure that the break truly goes to low-income mom-and-pop landlords and not wealthy new owners who can afford to pay. With our economic crisis that we're all facing, reducing relocation is shameful. Wealthy owners here are being picked over low-income tenants who can least afford to the reduced reload amounts. And for all of you who are Obama supporters, know that this plan mirrors Bush-McCain policies that strip benefits away from the poor to subsidize the wealthy, and that's why we say no cuts to relocation benefits. Thank you.
Okay. See, Larry, one thing that you don't know, one of us is a moose hunter. You just don't know which one. Before you start, we're not going, the cards that I have now for public comment, I'm closing it. So if you didn't get in your card, if somebody wants to speak, I'll give you like 10 seconds to get it in because we do have counsel. So with that said, It's you.
Good morning. I'm Tara Bannister, California Apartment Association Executive Director. I live and work here in Los Angeles, and I'll also note I am a tenant in a rent-controlled building here in Los Angeles. I want to thank you very much. You've obviously put a lot of careful consideration since the last public hearing on this, because it is difficult to weigh the interest of new owners in particular and those of 1 to 4 unit properties with those of tenants who obviously need a wonderful place to live, and hopefully the landlords will provide that. I wanted to note one thing very important in this is that you have already prohibited 62-plus-year-old and above from being evicted for good faith evictions in this. And that is something obviously we are going to support you in without a question. But I also want to speak about the resident manager. Very particular, I've spent a considerable amount of time in the last, what is now going to be 7 days, on wildfires. When it came to evacuating folks last week, the very first person I called in over 100 buildings was that resident manager. It is extremely important to have a resident manager in a building, no matter what size, it's 16 units or less, because they are the ones that are going to report crime. They're the ones that are going to evacuate a building. They're also the ones that are going to fix the clogged toilets and make sure the building is painted over from graffiti and all of that. They're often single moms that are at home raising their kids or new families. So thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you. Brandon Weiss and Veronica Perez Becker. Please come forward. Mr. Weiss.
Good morning. My name is Brandon Weiss. I'm a Skadden Fellow at Public Counsel Law Center. And we also appreciate the balancing act the city faces here, trying to accommodate true mom and pop landlords while also looking out for displaced tenants. However, as currently written, the proposal is extremely over-inclusive, allowing a much broader set of landlords than merely mom and pops to benefit from the reduced payments. As written, the key limiting criterion is that neither the owner nor the unit occupying family member owns any other RSO rental property. So that means that an owner that owns 15 properties throughout Southern California, only one of which happens to be an RSO unit, would still benefit from this program. So even setting aside the idea of imposing income limits, we could see there'd be a number of other criteria you could use to truly target mom and pop owners if that's what you're really trying to do. Start would be to consider all of the rental properties that a particular owner owns, not simply RSO units within LA. So I therefore ask that if you do pass this proposal, you reconsider the definition of eligible landlords to target actually the purpose that's been stated for this program. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Veronica.
Good morning, council members. Veronica Perez Becker with the Central City Association. We support making it easier for property owners to move into their own buildings. We see this as a striking a balance in the interests here. Certainly, tenants have rights that should be protected, especially the most vulnerable ones. But property owners have rights too, especially the ones who want to realize the American dream by moving in to their own properties that they own. And we think that this is a fair balance. What we're talking about is giving almost $11,000 to qualified tenants. That's still a significant increase from what tenant relocation fees were last year. But there are multiple interests here that need to be considered, and we do think this is a fair balance. And we think LAHD did a great job, although we feel like it could go further in including resident managers for that lowering. This council had convened a great panel yesterday to talk about the economic crisis that we're facing and to talk about how we can create and keep jobs. Let's remember, this is a good paying job. We want to incentivize building owners to move resident managers into the buildings. It's a great job. It's also really, as Tara Bannister said, beneficial to the tenants. They're the eyes and ears of the property. And just because resident managers are not required for buildings of under 16 units, it doesn't mean that property owners with units, buildings with less than 16 units can't have them in there, and they should, and we should incentivize that. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you. Autumn Elliott and Janet Melgen, I think it is. Elgin? What? Oh, Janet M. Elgin. I got you. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Autumn Elliott. I'm a staff attorney at the Los Angeles Center for Law and Justice. We provide legal services to indigent clients in our neighborhood of Boyle Heights and in the areas beyond. A large number of our clients are elderly, have disabilities, or both, and many of them also have small children. Especially when combined with poverty, these factors are tremendous barriers to finding decent, accessible housing. The current levels of relocation help reduce some of these barriers. Lowering those amounts when these tenants have to leave their homes does alleviate the burden on the landlord, but it puts it back on the tenant who's even less able to bear that burden. On behalf of our clients in East Los Angeles and the areas beyond, we ask that you keep the current levels of relocation assistance to protect our city's most vulnerable residents, the ones that are most subject to displacement and homelessness. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Elgin?
My name's Janet Elgin. I've been following relocation since 2006, and I've been attending hearings and hearings about this. And at the hearings when the relocation ordinance was revised, those went on for months and months and months. There was research and data presented. I bet it took 2 or 3 years to come up with that revised ordinance, yet just 3 months, a few months, I don't know, afterwards, this amendment was proposed. And I've been attending these hearings too, and it's all just opinion on why it should be reduced. I haven't heard any statistics or any data about why any person, particularly the most vulnerable, low income and families, but anyone, I just haven't heard any data about why. The reason why seems to be because that's why. We're just supposed to accept that. And I was evicted, and half my neighbors were seniors, and I know the difficulties they had. And it's almost $11,000, like they're supposed to be grateful. I know one man who's 62, a street musician, is paying $500 more a month to stay in his neighborhood, and that will last well less than 2 years. And everyone knows senior and affordable housing is not available. And also a lot of seniors don't know how to access city services, or they have a really strong work ethic that they wouldn't go on Section 8. And I'm curious how many of these people should be on Section 8 and they're not. And I hear there's a 10 to 12-year wait to get on Section 8.
Thank you.
And I've been in Los Angeles my whole life. My grandparents and my parents owned property.
Thank you, Ms. Elgin.
I never will.
Thank you.
I'm low income.
Thank you. Okay, that brings Chuck Tenen and Noel Weiss, the Sam and Dave of City Hall. Chuck? Good to see you.
Good to
And
see you.
too,
Good
Noel.
morning, committee members. Special joint meeting must be of great importance because everyone who should be here is not. When you're evicted at no fault, you say good faith. Good means good, faith means belief. How about the tenant's belief and our good faith leaders? Now tell me, what's the difference when somebody gets evicted for condo conversions, demolitions, and they have to move out and relocate? In 1987, I had to do this. Short notice, I had to move out because the owner wanted to have his daughter move in. She lived there 1 week, and we went to court, and the judge felt bad and gave me a 6-month stay. So tell me, what is the motive of good faith? Is it in the pocket of the owner in the form of higher rents where the tenant does not come back? Tell me what good faith is, and thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. Noel?
Herb, members of the committee, I find the politics of this a little bit distasteful. I think the idea here should be to try to bring people together, not find ways to separate them. I also find it ironic that the CCA and the Apartment Owners Association decried yesterday the bureaucracy. We have too much bureaucracy in the city, and yet they promote policies and programs that in effect create bureaucracy. What we have here is something that is needlessly bureaucratic, and it's the same issue that we had when we bifurcated the fees before. What we're down to, number one, the fees should not be changed. They should not be changed. This issue of good faith, you don't need to tie that into this. You can do that separately. In fact, that was my understanding of that was going to happen before. in recognition of the apartment owners, the small apartment owners, you solve the problem a couple of simple ways. One, you can enact an oil severance tax and use that fund, set it aside to supplement the ability of these small owners to make the payments. You can also, if you want another source of fund, and this is kind of a Barack Obama solution, raise the documentary transfer tax by a nickel or a dime per thousand for houses over $2 million. Put that into a fund. Give those owners an opportunity basically to draw into it. That would basically solve the problem and the issue as far as funding is concerned. Third, as far as the good faith, that's really a separate issue, Herb, and committee. That should be really taken up more in a better form. But to solve that very quickly, I think what we can do is have buildings, have a penalty against the building. But I got to go. Thank you.
So, I hope I didn't make you late. Okay, Richard Smith and Richard Arterstrom. Please come forward. Yes, sir.
Good morning, members of the committee, or half the committee. I'm beginning to wonder where the Plum Committee is today.
We got them. Don't worry. We got them.
I represent the United Coalition East Prevention Project. On behalf of our coalition, we oppose any reduction in payments to particularly senior citizens. This is a real burden, and as a minimum, if you insist on going forward with this plan as is, it should be indexed to a cost of living adjustment every year. For example, the Social Security adjustment this year is going to go up almost 5%. So the landlords, as a habit or as a course of business duties, they routinely index the rents to the cost of living. Every time you get a cost of living adjustment, they up the rent by the same amount. So again, I would say please do not reduce any payments, but if you do, please index the payments.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. Good morning, members of the committee. Rick Otterstrom from AGLA and the Los Angeles Association of Realtors. We support the reduction of all good faith evictions as stated in the original motion, and we have a couple problems with some of the things in the proposal that we have on the plate here. One would be the 4 or less units. I think that's, for reasons already stated, is not productive for the city of Los Angeles. But if I go to just to save time, I'll go straight to the proposed recommendations for enforcement. And I find that on the proposal, they're proposing not to allow managers, but down in number 9 and number 11, and a couple other places on the enforcement, they're referring to managers' units. So I don't know if that's, I think that should be there, and I think they should allow manager units, but I think that's inconsistent. Also, in number 7, it says expressly prohibit an eviction for owner of family occupancy if there is already an available vacant unit. No. That the, number 6, that the owner shall occupy the unit as their primary place of residence. Nowhere in there does it reciprocate saying that the tenant should be their primary place of residence. And
okay, Rick, thanks.
Okay.
It's only 90 seconds. I'm sorry. Steve Diaz and Bilal Ali. Good morning.
Good morning.
Mr. Diaz, you're first.
Good morning, council members. My name is Steve Diaz, and I'm with the Los Angeles Community Action Network, LA CAN. LA CAN has been working for increased tenant protection for residential hotel tenants throughout downtown Los Angeles and throughout the city of Los Angeles for over the last 5 years. Today, we stand in support of the increased safeguards and the changes to the RSO, but we stand against the reduction in relocation assistance money. It is a shame that in this time where the most needy need the need of political leadership and need the need of the city will be considering such an impactful policy that will impact not only low-income seniors, it will impact low-income communities that are facing these types of issues in terms of relocation monies. Once again, we say no to the reduction of relocation money and yes to the protection for low-income and tenants throughout the city of LA. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ali. Good to see you again.
Bilal Ali, I'm the lead organizer with Coalition LA. On behalf of our constituents, we believe that reducing relocation payments provides a loophole for landlords who will benefit at the expense of renters already facing hardships, such as senior citizens and the disabled. Reducing relocation payments ignores the fact that relocation amounts are nowhere near the real costs required to relocate in today's market. An example is that we represent people who, because of the relocation amounts before and now, are forced out of their unit, their dwellings. They're forced to pay $400 and $500 a week in a one-room hotel while they're feverishly searching for affordable housing. Council members Perry, Garcetti, and yourself, Councilman Wesson, you signed on to the Housing LA Pledge, which one plank of that platform was to preserve affordable housing. We feel that any reduction in the payments is a threat to affordable housing preservation, and we ask you humbly to not support reducing these fees, and actually we need the fees to be hiked up if anything. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. West.
Miss Perry wants to make
I just wanted to say one thing to Mr. Ali and to the group. I know Mr. Reyes and I think we were there together at one of those meetings, and I made a suggestion because people who are here in this room engage in pretty high level of production of affordable housing, and I get a little tired of people who are elected officials who say they support affordable housing and yet they don't do it in their own communities, and they actually subtly make sure that it doesn't happen. And I suggest to you publicly that if your organization really wants to create a shift, sea of change, that you take a look at all elected officials within the city of Los Angeles and take a look at their level of production of affordable housing units, because I think for the folks who are here at this table and Mr. Reyes, you'll find that it's quite high. And Mr. Reyes and I had expressed some frustration that, we keep signing these pledges when we're doing it anyway, and yet nothing changes from your group's perspective, in that you're not looking at or advocating with those elected officials who may sign a pledge and then they don't do anything. So what I'm saying to you is, everybody says they love affordable housing. Not everybody actually does it. So what I'm saying to you is you need to take a look at those who aren't doing it and push a little harder on that.
Okay. Thank you. But see,
you know how turf boards.
Okay, Mr. Ali. Okay.
I'm just responding.
I understand. Now that brings us to Jim Clark and David Chavarria. Jim, good morning.
Good morning. You want me to go ahead?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you very much for the time. I'm Jim Clark, Manager of Government Relations for the Apartment Association of Greater Los Angeles. We represent over 25,000 managers and owners of affordable housing. Most people live in apartments because they can't afford to buy their own home. And I must correct one of my counterparts earlier who said wealthy landlords. Wealthy landlords are not moving into their own buildings. Anyway, I want to applaud the Housing Committee for lowering the threshold of ownership to 25%. I think that was a very good move. It might encourage people to buy buildings, move into them, rehab them, and make them better places to live. I also want to applaud the Housing Department for understanding that this, in this day and age, folks are getting older, and that they recognize that grandparents and grandchildren should be a part of this as well. I might also add that full-time caregivers, 24-hour caregivers, should be included as well. 43% of our membership are senior citizens, and those that live in their own buildings might at some point in time need full-time care. We would like to see full-time caregivers included in good faith relocations. Also, I would just like to thank the committee and the department for its hard work, and we look forward to continuing the debate and the talk on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm here with Coalition for Economic Survival, and I'm going to translate for a tenant.
Fine.
Buenos días.
Good
Mi
morning.
nombre es David Chavarría.
My name is David Chavarria.
El motivo por el cual yo estoy aquí es porque
The reason why I'm
represento al
here
distrito
is because I'm
13 de
representing
la coalición,
District
señor
13, Eric Garcetti.
El motivo es para suplicarles de que
The reason is to
¿cómo los
please
afectaría?
ask you.
David, and then hold his time.
Okay.
I'm the only member here that doesn't understand. So I'm going to ask so that I can get your story. Slow it down a little bit so I can hear what she says.
Y también le van a dar más tiempo. ¿ok?
Show off.
Okay.
Go on.
El motivo por el cual yo estoy aquí
The reason why I'm here
es para suplicarles
is to please ask you
que se ponga la mano en su conciencia y cómo los
to
afectaría.
be conscious about this decision and how it will affect
¿Cómo los afectaría a nosotros, la familia
As-
de bajos recursos?
as a family of low income.
Que si los van a desalojar, pues que los den lo justo, que no reduzcan lo que es nosotros.
If we're going to have to be evicted, not to reduce the relocation fees.
Porque tengo mis dos hijos,
I have 2 sons,
y si me desalojan,
and if I'm evicted,
yo pienso también en mis vecinos, mis inquilinos,
I also think about my neighbors,
que son también de avanzada edad,
that they're old seniors, some of them.
que si los van a desalojar, que los den lo justo.
If they're going to be evicted, to please give us just what's fair.
Y de corazón se los digo que
I'm please asking you
piensen en la familia de bajos recursos,
to think about low income family,
que somos nosotros.
which is us.
Somos personas trabajadoras
We're hardworking people,
y pienso que no,
and I think
que porque somos personas humildes, que no
just
hagan,
because we're humble people,
que no hagan que hagan lo justo.
to please do just what's fair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. If we could have the housing department come forward. Good morning.
Good morning.
So did you decide to pick that side for some particular reason? Before you start your presentation, I don't know if he's still here. I think it was Mr. Smith. We've heard several references or concerns where it relates to senior citizens. Can you quickly address what protections are in place for seniors and disabled?
Well, what is in our proposal? First off, Hakam Mordezai Housing Department. In our proposal, we are recommending that in an owner occupancy eviction, actually in good faith evictions, that seniors, long-term disabled people, they cannot be evicted from their unit in order to move in an owner, a family member, or a resident manager.
That's a change?
That's a change. That is, we've never had that in our RSO, correct, Council President?
That's new.
That's brand new that we're recommending. So if you've lived there for 10 years, you're an elderly person, you're a disabled person, you cannot be evicted. We also, in our supplemental report, added that if you're terminally ill, regardless of how long you live there, so long as that's certified by a treating medical physician, that you cannot be evicted. So somebody who is dying of cancer, they can't be evicted in order for the owner to move in or the family member to move in or the resident manager to move in.
Okay, now you can go through your presentation.
Yes, good morning, committee chair, committee members. My name is Roberto Aldapi. I'm the assistant general manager for the housing department. And on behalf of my general manager, we thank you for the opportunity to discuss the tenant relocation program and the good faith protections as put forth in the council member Zine and Parks motion. We think that the housing department believes that the recommendations as set forth in our report back are both fair and equitable, and it truly balances the interests of the owners, particularly those who are considered mom and pops, 1 to 4 units, who wish to occupy their units or wish to have family members occupy their units, as well as protecting the interests of tenants who are being displaced from rent-stabilized units through no fault of their own. Mr. Morley will be highlighting some of the provisions in our recommendations, and we'll be more than happy to answer any questions or address any concerns that committee members may have.
Okay, thank you. Are there questions?
I'd just like them
Ms.
to
Barry?
highlight what is new in this for the record that did not exist before.
Certainly. Thank you very much, Councilwoman Garcetti. I'm sorry, Perry.
We're married.
It's a wonderful wedding, too.
Don't tell anybody.
My apologies for...
Congratulations to the both of you.
Tell Amy when you get home, okay?
Residency is a tough thing.
Yeah, yes.
My apologies.
No, it's not, don't apologize, it's a good thing.
In the original motion, the original motion sought to revert the relocation amounts to the prior amounts, prior to the ordinance that was adopted last year. And in the balancing that we did not agree with reverting to the prior amounts. We found them wholly inadequate.
So what were the prior amounts?
The prior amounts was $3,500 and $8,500 for the qualified tenants.
Okay, so the difference now is?
We're recommending $7,000 for the regular tenants and $10,900 for the qualified tenants. And we also are recommending that be applied in very limited circumstances as outlined in the report. That the owner, and we actually concur with one of the comments, and we would ask to amend the report with one of the comments that was made so that it currently reads the report that the owner not own any other RSO property. We would say that the owner not own any other residential property, because the point of it is to really that if you have somewhere else to live, the reduced relocation wouldn't be appropriate to you. We would concur with the amendment of the report to reflect that. Also, we
Just stop there for a second, because I know that was brought up. So anybody who own non-RSO properties, that would also qualify as an exception. They could not do a good faith eviction.
It's not that they wouldn't do a good faith eviction; it's the reduced relocation amounts.
The amount would be the higher amount. Okay,
right.
Gotcha.
In our balancing, LHD recommendations includes a minimum ownership percentage, and this is to protect tenants from evictions by owners with minimal ownership interests, to avoid evictions by speculators who abuse the owner occupancy provisions to evade the RSO itself. Currently, there are no ownership percentage requirements in the RSO. You could own 1% and technically be able to evict. We don't believe that that's fair, and so in our balancing to come up with the right percentage amount, we looked at the statistics, and what we saw that 95% of owner-occupied units are in properties with 4 units or less. So when we're talking about owner occupancy evictions, we're really talking about those occurring in properties that are 4 units or less. And so we're recommending a 1/4 ownership or 25% minimum ownership percentage for owner occupancy evictions to allow moderate income owners who pool the resources to occupy the units that they own. Our recommendations also include best practices from other jurisdictions, which are essentially provisions to prevent fraudulent use of good faith evictions as an end run on both the Ellis protections that you all adopted in the last 2 years and also the RSO itself. Our recommendations also include an expansion of the family to include grandparents and grandchildren, because this conforms with the provisions in other California rent control jurisdictions and their best practices. Our recommendations also include, as you have pointed out, Chairman Wesson, protection for long-term elderly and disabled tenants, and also tenants who are terminally ill. The relocations amounts, just in response to a couple of comments made, the relocation amounts are always indexed in the RSO, so they will increase with the CPI as according to the current formula. And there was also a misunderstanding on resident managers. The current RSO allows for eviction for resident manager. This doesn't change that. What we are not agreeing to, we don't think it's the appropriate striking of the balance, is to have reduced relocations for resident manager. No other jurisdictions don't even allow for evictions for resident managers. We do, but the state law only requires resident managers for units that are 16 or less, and certainly that doesn't fall into the council's growing definition for what is a mom and pop landlord. And that's essentially the basics of the proposals that we put forth.
Okay.
Mr. Garcetti, did you have anything you wanted to add?
So the CPI, there was one part of the RSO where CPI wasn't, that we didn't index it, isn't that correct?
Not for the relocation amounts, Councilman Garcetti.
You sure that there's not one? Wasn't there one? Well, let me look into it. I was informed there was one aspect that, and it may not be germane to what we're doing here today, but I wanted to make sure that we had CPI across the board, because so often we've inherited policies where we never adjusted for inflation what these amounts are, and so it's a real loss over time for tenants. I want to thank my constituent who spoke very powerfully. Muchísimas gracias por su testimonio. And we know that a lot of this is also about the enforcement of this. And could you go through a little bit just on our enforcement mechanism and how we can have the guarantees on the enforcement side? Most people are good actors on this, and we acknowledge that. Where there are bad actors, oftentimes we just see people get away with it because by the time somebody is gone, and if they're lucky enough to find legal representation or advocacy, that is the exception. And we try to do ongoing education, which is really critical on both landlord and tenant side of rights and responsibilities. But what assurances can you give the committee on the enforcement side?
Certainly. First off, I just want to briefly say that in our recommendations are a whole series of requirements that really touch on preventing fraud. Things like you actually have to move in within 3 months. You actually have to be there for 24 months in good faith. And also, if you fail to act in good faith, that we provide for treble damages, attorney's fees, and costs. And so we're increasing the sanctions which are imposable and the requirements with which landlords have to adhere to, and so that to ensure good faith, because that was one of the charges that you all gave us. In terms of the department's own monitoring, unlike any other rent control jurisdictions, we are actually looking to insert ourselves into this process and not just rely on the courts because of our large size and the demographics that we deal with. And so we are proposing a monitoring program paid for with an administrative fee. In the monitoring program, we ask that the owner file a declaration with us within 3 months of the termination of the tenancy so that they've moved in. And then we would follow up with a letter to the unit to verify that in case that's not occurred. On the anniversaries of their moving in, they would be required to file with us a declaration. If they don't comply with this, then there is a penalty involved that's set forth in the recommendations. So that
the evicted tenant? That penalty, or does it go to the city?
The penalties are criminal penalties, and so they would go to the city. But the evicted tenant has what they have there is the abilities that is provided through the proposals for, first off, right of first refusal, controlled rent, and also the action for treble damages and the attorney's fees.
So if a tenant has been evicted, it turns out somebody hasn't fulfilled the residency requirement of owner-occupied unit, that tenant comes back in?
Yes, they have the right to come back in.
Moved into it?
They have the right to come back in. And we would, of course, the tenant has to keep us abreast of their information, and that's part of the forms that we're going to create.
So we would keep a record during this time of that tenant,
exactly,
where he or she goes, so we can keep that, because that's a critical piece. We just lose contact, and again, relying on finding where that person is.
Oh, it would be impossible. So obviously, we are inserting ourselves to make sure, and just by inserting ourselves, we're going to have an impact on this whole field, because up to now we've been absent from an active involvement, and we relied on the courts. By being there, by having these recommendations in the ordinance itself, that's going to impact when people actually say that they're going to evict someone to move in for owner occupancy.
Just one last question, Mr. Chair. Under the current relocation payment required, we do have a differentiation between less than 3 years and more than 3 years. Can you walk us through the logic behind getting rid of that differentiation?
The logic that we have here is not necessarily, is essentially to respond to the original motion. And so the proposal that we've put forth is to deal with the attempt to roll back to the amounts. And so the proposal that we put forth is just to distinguish between the owner occupancy, it's to distinguish between an eligible tenant and a qualified tenant in the way that it was originally set up, because that's what was being proposed, that we go back to the old structure. And so instead of going back to the old structure in terms of amounts, we are going back to the old structure in terms of eligible and qualified, but we are increasing the amounts compared to the old structure, but obviously not compared to the current amounts.
And my last comment to conclude on that is I would just want the city attorney to look at, I mean, if we have a differentiation in our policy, whether or not if somebody brings a legal challenge that, you know, we're consistent or we're inconsistent. In one area, we do have a differentiation of what 3 years means qualitatively, and here we don't. And so, you know, maybe we could, I'd like some reassurance. If not, I think we need to keep that some sort of differentiation between the two.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to go on the record. It was the council president that caused us to be late.
Judy Reel, Deputy City Attorney. I think that distinction would be lawful. It's an economic regulation, so there just needs to be a rational basis. I think the city can lawfully determine that in this one situation, it's reasonable not to require an owner to pay the full freight of the cost of relocation. So I think it would be lawful to make that that distinction.
Okay. Seeing there's no more questions or concerns, without objection, we will adopt the Housing Department supplemental report.
That has the amendment in it? That has an amendment?
That has the amendment to read, Council Chair, that the reduced relocation amounts only apply if the owner or the family occupying, unit occupying family member does not own any other residential property as opposed to any other RSO property.
So that has that.
Do we have that? Okay. All right, then, like I said, we'll adopt the Housing Department supplemental report and request the city attorney draft the ordinance. I have 2 public comment cards. If I could get Chuck and Noel to come up. Thank you, and thank everybody for coming and being so patient.
Go ahead, Chuck.
Noel, I think you're first this time.
Oh.
No.
Yes, thank you. Sorry. Herb, very quickly, I just wanted to thank you and the committee relative to my concern about the failure of the Housing Department to acknowledge publicly for the benefit of the tenants, the fact that tenants and conversions can can basically terminate their leases. The Housing Department, I guess, Andrew did meet with Mercedes Marquez. We do have it, and I'm handing to you a copy of the update, which is in October, that now solves that problem. So thank you for that. Next problem is the Housing Department. Please. The next problem, and and I'm handing you this as well, these declarations, the deal that we just went through with either landlord declarations where they're moving in or Ellis declarations. There's a problem, Herb, and the problem is that when these things are signed, they're certifying under penalty of perjury that they're evicting the people. That's not happening. These declarations are false, and what's happening is the landlords, with either the unwitting knowledge or consent of the Housing Department or whatever, the landlords are now using this to take advantage of the tenants, because what ends up happening is they go in and they say, well, we're evicting, but we're really not, and then they're using this as a ruse basically to get the tenants out the door. It's not right, it's not consistent, and it has to change. That was we've got a number of instances where I've been involved where essentially these tenants are put in the position of having to defend in evictions unlawful Ellis Act declarations or landlord declarations, and that is another issue that we basically have to resolve. The law is clear. It's just a question of the Housing Department changing their policy. Maybe Andrew can talk to Mercedes. Maybe we can do something along those lines. But I really think it's okay.
Thank you. John?
All right. I see they all left. Committee members, with regard to housing, we have 90 neighborhood city councils in the city. Each gets a $50,000 budget each year. It should be mandatory to take $5,000 of that from each to hire a qualified city planner for issues and to explain in detail the entire process of development projects in their community. And it's good to see the presence of the Housing Department to give their weekly report on problems they have encountered and how they propose to solve them for the tenants. And Herb, as many others do, I still say you'd make a good mayor. You have the heart for it.
Don't even go there.
We need a man like you who cares about people, and you can move mountains. And I'd like to pay my condolences to Arvis Jones. On Monday night, her son, whose wife is going to have a baby in 2 months, was shot and killed by a needless drive-by. And Miss Arvis is an active, strong supporter of Janice Hahn's Gang Prevention Task Force, and she's giving her time informing and rehearsing the Watts Youth Choir, who are going to sing a song entitled Stop the Violence, We Can Live in Peace, which will be a message in music to help fund gang prevention youth programs in this city. And stop the violence, we can all live in peace. Let's put love back in our streets. God bless Miss Arvis and her lost son. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a tragedy, Chuck.
It is.
Madam City CLA, is there any more business before this committee?
No, sir.
This committee is adjourned.